Okay, we're doing all the fun stuff now. So we have Chapter 15, Monetary Policy. The Fed was originally set up in 1913, but it was set up kind of part of the executive branch of government. So, for example, the Secretary of the Treasury was the chair of the Fed. The problem with doing that, and we'll talk about that in the last chapter, is that Fed's central banks that are not independent of their government tend to do the wrong thing sometimes. And again, we'll talk about that more later. So during the Great Depression, the Federal Reserve is changed. Everybody realizes that there were issues dating back 20 years at this point, and the Federal Reserve needs to be changed. So we get the more independent Fed, and as part of this Federal Reserve Act of 1934, Congress lays out what the Fed's job is. So the Fed, some people on the Fed thought their job was to cut back at the start of the Depression and keep the Fed kind of like a regular bank financially, and Congress made clear that that's not what the Fed's supposed to do. So the Fed's job is to create maximum employment, stable prices, and moderate long-term interest rates. Those three things are the Fed's job, and they're still the Fed's job under the law. I put the moderate long-term interest rates thing into a different color to highlight that for you. The modern Fed takes the position that really that's not a separate goal. That if they can do that, if they're maintaining moderate long-term interest rates, then stable prices are going to be a consequence of that. If interest rates are stable, prices are stable. So they kind of take these two things in the modern world. They take those two things as interconnected and part of the same goal, that by working to create moderate long-term interest rates, and there's no definition of moderate, right? The Congress didn't define any of these things. There's no problem if they don't have to separately act to maintain stable prices. All they got to do is maintain moderate long-term interest rates. The question of how maximum employment applies to them is a little sketchier. And frequently when, for example, during 2007, 8, 9, when the economy is not doing too well, they will do things to try to fix unemployment problems in the United States. And in 2020, they're doing things to try to fix unemployment problems in the United States. But when they send out press releases that they've talked about this and they've decided that they're going to work on unemployment, they always, somewhere in there's always a little note. And the little note always says, this is assuming there's no inflation. But if inflation gets bad, we're going to work on that. And we're going to ignore what happens to employment. Okay? And there's some complicated stuff that goes along with that, but we'll get there. So, the Fed today, they say, if you ask the Fed, what's your job? They'll say, number 1, conducting monetary policy. Number 2, promoting financial system stability. Number 3, supervising and regulating financial institutions. Number 4, fostering payment systems. And number 5, promoting consumer protection and community development. So yeah, they're out there working on the money supply and interest rates. They're out there making sure that your bank is, functioning in a proper and correct manner, and that the whole financial system, including, the stock market and all the markets for weird financial things and bonds and all this stuff, that it's all working correctly. Remember that one of the jobs of the Federal Reserve is facilitating transactions when you use your debit card or some kind of electronic payment. That runs through the Fed. The Fed's job is to make sure that all is functioning well. But then part of their job is to make sure that there's some protection for consumers in all this, and so they have truth in lending laws and that kind of thing that are part of the Federal Reserve, that they've got to give you plain language statements about things when you go to get a loan, and they want their banks involved in community development efforts. And in fact, they've done studies that show that the best way for them to deal with the employment thing may be for them to push community development, where they say to local banks, part of your job is to help develop your community, to make sure that you're making loans that are in your community and doing things to develop all the areas of your community, right? Traditionally in towns, banks, of course, would rather give money to rich people than poor people, because rich people are probably more likely to pay their loan back than poor people, and who wants those poor people around kind of deal. And so the Fed has had to actively promote this idea that banks need to put their resources into their community and across their whole community, not just certain parts of their community, right? Which we think is probably a good thing for them to do, yes? Anyway. So what are the goals of monetary policy? Right? The number one thing on the Fed's list is they do monetary policy. What are the goals? Well, number one, stable prices. Got that? It's in their law. Number two, high employment. Unemployment to them is something that they think about, but not their primary obligation. They don't believe that that's their primary duty. And part of that goes back to this whole theory about how does the real and the nominal come together. Employment is a real thing. Prices are a nominal thing. Theory kind of says that the money side of the house, money, interest rates, should have more effect on the nominal side than on the real side. Not that they don't interact and not that they don't affect each other, but it should be easier for the Fed to deal with price stability as an issue than to deal with high employment as an issue. Okay, and then stability of the financial system. We don't want the system crashing. We don't want banks or stockbrokers going bust. We want the system to be stable. And then long term. So the economic growth. So the Fed says, look, we look at monetary policy in three ways. We look at it right now. We look at it in what they call the medium term, and then they look at its effects in what they call the long term. But most of their decisions that they make are going to be built on that shorter term period. And again, they're going to believe, the Fed believes, that if they can maintain those moderate interest rates and maintain price stability, that economic growth is much more likely to take care of itself. Okay? Again, we'll talk about that more over time. So, let's talk about the demand and supply of money. Okay? We already talked about one way that interest rates might get formed, and that's loanable funds. Right? In an earlier chapter, we talked about there's a supply and demand for loans. Right? There's a supply of loans that are loanable, funds that are loanable. There's money out there for people who want loans, and then there's the demand for loans. And those two things should have an effect on interest rates. Okay? The other thing that has an effect on interest rates, though, is the total amount of money that's demanded in the system. We demand money, we need money for a variety of things. You need money to make transactions. If you want to go get your Starbucks in the morning, it's helpful to have money. Occasionally you're in the Starbucks line and the person in front of you passes back and pays your bill for you. And hopefully sometime when you're in line, you pay that back and you pay the bill of the person behind you in line. Right? But you got to have cash for these transactions. And most of us put some money away for our savings for precaution in case we get a flat tire or we have an emergency or something. We have some money in the bank that we can use to deal with that emergency. Those things are not terribly sensitive to the interest rate. But the interest rate does affect the interest of people holding money in one sense, and that sense is the following. Let's suppose that there aren't good investments out there. So let's suppose that it's during the real crash when the stock market's falling, and it's either 2007, 2008, or early part of 2020, the economy is crashing. There aren't good investments. There aren't good places to put your money. The return on your money, the interest rate, is very low. There's nothing to be gained. So you tend, if you're smart, people are going to transfer their money out of these assets and put their money into cash and hold it into cash. And a lot of money moves into either cash or assets like treasury bills that are short-term, very safe assets. But they're not investing in the sense you think about investing. Okay? Why? If I can't make money on my money, then I should hold it as money, as a liquid asset, right? Money is liquid. I can move it into something. If I buy a whole bunch of stock with my money, or I buy some real estate with my money, it's more difficult if a better opportunity comes along to transfer into that better opportunity. So when interest rates are really low, when the return on investing is really low, I'm going to hold a lot of money as cash or as easy as a liquid form so that I can jump on a better opportunity when it comes by. On the other hand, if I can invest my money and make a lot of money, easy, if that stock market is cruising up, if it's just booming, or if banks are paying high interest on money because they need you, well, I'm going to do the opposite. It's stupid then to keep money as cash because you're giving up, remember, opportunity cost. If the stock market's going up 20% a year, or real estate's going up 20% a year, it's stupid for you to hold a lot of cash because you're giving up 20% by holding it. So when interest rates are really high, when the return on investments are really high, people do not want to hold money. When interest rates are really low, people want to hold on to lots of money so that when something better comes along, they're in a position that they can invest in it, that they can put their money in it. Okay? So remember, the opportunity cost of holding cash in your pocket is the interest you gave up. If your bank is paying 0.25%, yeah, you're not losing anything by keeping cash in your pocket or in your piggy bank. But if your bank were all of a sudden paying 6%, or if we were in the middle again of a huge stock or real estate boom, it's very costly for you to keep that money in your pocket. Okay? The demand for money is not the quantity of money that people actually have. It's the quantity of money that they wish to have, that they want to have. Remember that this is supply and demand, right? So I wish I had more money, but I might not actually have it, right? I might not. So we got to get a supply curve into this thing somewhere. Yeah? Hopefully. Money demand, again, the quantity of money that people wish to hold. It's how much money I want to have available to me. It's going to increase when real GDP or prices go up. So if there's more stuff to buy or prices are higher, I'm going to want more money, right? I need more money. If Starbucks raises their price from $3 to $4, I need more money. I need $4 instead of $3 in the morning, right? And obviously, it's going to decrease the other way. If Starbucks were to lower their price to $2, now I don't need to carry as much money around because I only need $2. Let's assume for this analysis that the money supply is controlled by the Fed. We know that it's only sort of controlled by the Fed, that the Fed, at times, the money supply or the amount of money out in the system jumps one way or another because of things that banks do or things that consumers do, and the Fed can act and it can move, it can get it back on track, but it doesn't exactly control the money supply every second of every day. But the quantity of money, the money supply, is the amount of money that people actually have. So we're comparing how much money I want to have versus how much money I actually have. And if we put those on a graph together, we're going to see that there's one interest rate, right? It's the cool thing about all these markets, they're really kind of the same underneath. Your engine in your Ferrari is kind of the same as the engine in your Corolla. They're all kind of the same underneath. At 3% interest on this graph, The amount of money that people want to have is equal to the amount of money that they do have. And that's the only interest rate for which that is true. It's the only interest rate where the quantity of money that people wish to have is equal to the quantity of money that they actually have. Okay? So we have the money supply, we have this one thing. Now, what were to happen if the Fed were to increase the money supply? What would happen if the Fed was going to increase the money supply? Ooh. Equilibrium is going to change, right? If you increase supply, equilibrium changes. If the Fed puts more money in the system, banks have to do something to get people to take that money, and what they have to do is lower the price. Remember that the interest rate is the price of money. So when there's more money out there and we want to get people to take that money, we've got to offer it to them at a lower price. We have to have a sale on money, and interest rates are going to go down. Banks are going to have to lower interest rate. Now, if you're saying, why do we have two? Well, there's actually more than two interest rates and more that, but the easiest way, and again, life is more complex than this, but the easiest way that your book says it is that first one we did, loanable funds, is the real interest rate. And this market is a short-term nominal interest rate. So there's nominal interest rates and real interest rates and all these interest rates, and we don't want to confuse you, right? But you just need to think about if there's more money in a market, whether it's loanable funds market or just money in general. If there's more money in the market, that tends to make interest rates go down. And if there's less money in the market, that tends to make interest rates go up. Okay? And that the Fed has a big say of how much money is floating around in these markets.